my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always found acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Very good. Well, today we gather and remember something that I think correctly and rightly the church has emphasized throughout the ages, and that is a notion that somehow or another we're all united mystically. We're united not only while we're on the face of the earth, but we're united even after we die. Now pay close attention to what I'm about to say, because I'm about to pay you a great compliment. The cutting edge of human evolution means not only that you believe in a God, that is relatively new to human nature, this notion that there is an other that we call God. And that's at the forefront of human evolution. So give yourself some credit for not only being here, but even more so, that after we die, something happens. Something continues. That's the second great insight into what it means to be a human being. Only human beings are the species that I'm aware of who have some conscious recognition that after our lives here on earth, there's something else that unfolds. I think only elephants are the species that grieve for a departed one. And human beings not only grieve for the departed one, but we also believe that there's something more. It's at the cutting edge of human awareness and consciousness to believe in what we call an afterlife. Now, this has come about and is still incomplete in most people's minds, and yet it's been fashioned and part of our faith ever since, certainly, the time of Jesus. Even when Jesus lived, there was a segment of the Jewish population that didn't believe in an afterlife, that said that this life is all that there is. And I don't think Jesus sided with that camp of Jews. You know, he himself, of course, being Jewish, thought something differently. The new covenant is part of this. The new covenant is Jesus himself modeling and showing us a new vista that's before all of us, and it's breathtaking in its scope. I don't think it's fully dawned upon humanity yet, even 2,000 years later. But by his not only death, but by his resurrection of the dead, Jesus showed us that there's something about being human, perhaps even something about living in other facets of this created world, being a dog or being a plant, that continues to live on. And so we kind of mumble and stumble and fumble about wording for this. We call it the soul. And the development of the soul, I think, is at the crux of what it means to be human. We can make money, but if we don't have a soul, we're not human. We can live a long life, but if we don't have a soul, we're not human. That's what John Donne was talking about. John Donne was no mean theologian. And what he said was that no man is an island. We not only have souls, But somehow or another, our souls are united to those who have even gone before. And so, Leslie, your father's dad is here because his soul is here. It's not just mystics that say the difference between life and death is very thin. It's becoming increasingly common knowledge that the difference between life and death, for believers at least, is indeed perhaps no more than a breath away, or a random thought that comes to us about a dearly departed loved one. I myself lost one of my greatest mentors in life about 10 years ago, a sister. And every once in a while, there comes a point where her presence is keenly felt. And I think it's because somehow or another, not only is there an afterlife, but it's not remote. Most of us have grown up with the notion that heaven is a kind of place beyond the stars. I don't believe so. I believe it's much closer than that. And that we're united, the living to the dead, by the very air that we take in. That's why the past is never quite the past. It's always in the process of being rejuvenated and rekindled and renewed and restored and deepened. That's why we can love somebody who is dead long after their physical death here on earth, because our memory is alive with them and their soul resonates with our souls. And that's a rich way to live. I have to say that we people, especially we white-skinned people in the West, have got something to learn from those who we say are populating third world countries. Because in countries that are deemed as third world, there is a very deeply held belief in what I would call ancestor worship. For those of you that perhaps come from Africa, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That was part of your background growing up. And in Christian circles, it's the communion of the living and the dead. And I think we've appropriated in Christianity a sense of the crucifixion of Jesus as one of the central tenets of our faith, and the resurrection of Jesus as one of the central tenets of our faith. But I think we still have a ways to go to appropriate the importance of what this mystical union of the living to the dead that we remember on days like today, All Saints' Day, conjure up. Because if we take that understanding and think about it for a while, it's going to transform our lives, and it's going to transform our lives right here and now. I can think of at least several ways where our lives will be transformed if we really understand and really appropriate and really live out what it means to be united with the living to the dead. The first thing is that if our spirits continue to live, then while we're on the face of the earth, we have to realize that our time is short, and that therefore we need to make the most of it, not in a competitive way, not as if we were an island competing against the rest of the world, but rather as being united in our souls, essentially united, deeply united, meaningfully united. This is not just a dream. This is reality. That it's not so much a competitive world that we live in order to survive. It's a cooperative world. And we're so attached that at some level we're mystically united to one another. We have more in common with one another than we have diversity with one another. The second thing that we need to remember, if we understand the communion of saints properly, is the importance of forgiveness, both being forgiven and forgiving others while we're on the face of the earth. And the reason is that this thin veil that I'm talking about means that after we all die, we're still going to have to interact with one another. And for the rest of our life, which is immortal, spiritually, we're going to have to interact with people that we may have had differences with while we're on the face of the earth. So you'd better reconcile while you've still got time. Pretty smart planning on God's part, wasn't it?
Amen.
Amen. You better believe it. You know, there's a saying, just one word, that's very hard to translate in English. But I think it illustrates how we in the first world country can learn from people who know a little bit about the workings of God from other parts of the world, other parts that we sometimes demean and call third world countries. That license plate has the word Ubuntu on it. And it's not easily translated into English. But roughly what it means is, I am well, only insofar as we are all well together, which is a recognition that my soul, my spiritual well-being, needs to be well in the context of a community. It's the growing awareness of what it means to be a human being, not in isolation, but in communion. And that word Ubuntu was well known in South Africa at about the time of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings, after apartheid had ended. And the people who made up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, headed by Desmond Tutu, used that word as their operative way of being. I am well, only insofar as you are well. Which meant that they were able to forgive others who during apartheid had committed heinous acts. Which meant that life could go on in South Africa after apartheid without very much bloodshed or violence at all. Because those people were living into the reality of being in the communion of saints. Do you follow what I'm saying? Our survival is based upon this notion that we're united in this mystical body, that the church has proclaimed sometimes not so well, and other times beautifully well, by saying we're a communion of the living and the dead, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, male and female. And that life takes on a special meaning. Life takes on a vitality and a beauty that would otherwise be incomprehensible. If all I'm thinking about is making more money, I'm losing a very important dimension of what it means to be a human being. Indeed, I'm losing my soul. But if we enter into the communion of saints, if we celebrate all those who have gone before, who are now and will be in the future, who exhibit courage, nobleness of spirit, faithfulness and fortitude, then our lives are going to be strengthened. So live into All Saints Sunday. Live into the reality that God is with us in such a way that no one can be against us. Let us stand.